Everyone has heard of the legendary whale of Moby Dick, which terrorized a group of whalers in the high seas. But have you ever heard of Moby Doll, another whale that terrorized people for a different reason? Moby Doll was an infant orca that was one of the first successful cases of an orca surviving captivity, and in return changed the world forever. But how do we get to this point, and what are the ramifications of this been? Join us to look at the relationship between humans and orcas and see if we can live together peacefully. Orcas have roamed the seas for 3 to 4 million years and evolved radically since then. The many indigenous cultures around the world have stories about orcas. The First Nations in the Pacific Northwest tell tales of their deceased chiefs being reincarnated as killer whales. In Australia, the Tawa people of Twofold Bay worked with the potted killer whales and in turn created what is known as the law at the time. And the Inuit of the Arctic tell stories of orcas as a guardian spirit and a source of wisdom to them. Killer whales have been seen for many centuries. However, the first recorded orca was by Conrad Gessner in 1558, writing the first description of orca in his book. The name orca comes from the Greek word orkinos orca, which translates to of the kingdom of the dead or belonging to Orcas. Orcas is an ancient Roman god of the underworld and the punisher of broken oaths. The most widely known moniker given to orcas is killer whales, which arose from sailors witnessing orcas hunt large whales in the high seas and take them down effectively, hence the name. The scientific understanding of orcas is intriguing as well. Orcas are members of the dolphin family, which are characterized by their distinctive black and white coloration, large dorsal fins, powerful bodies, incredibly high intelligence, and social dynamics. Orcas live in pods, which are matrilineal family groups run by the oldest female. They exhibit amazing ability to adapt to new situations and form strong social bonds between whales. The relationship between man and whale in the modern age did not start until the mid-1850s in Australia. During the early 19th and 20th century, in the town of Eden, which is situated on Twofold Bay in Australia, the whaling station that the Davidson family set up was booming. Their secret was they had help from an unlikely ally, a group of killer whales known as the killer whales of Eden. The whalers forged an extraordinary alliance with the whales, with the most notable whale being named Old Tom. Old Tom would actively assist the whalers in hunting baleen whales by herding them into the bay and then alerting the whalers to the presence of a whale in the bay by thrashing and or splashing. The whalers then would proceed to the whale with Old Tom in tow and would kill it and bring it back to the station. In return for their assistance, the whalers would then allow the orcas to feed on the lips and the tongue of the whale, which was not commercially valuable to them. The whalers would then take the rest of the whale, and this became known as the law of the tongue. This continued until 1930, when unfortunately Old Tom was found washed up dead on the beach, and the pod of orcas never returned since. Old Tom's skeleton was preserved and eventually donated to the Eden Killer Whale Museum, where it still is to this day. Since the 1930s, the sightings of killer whales off the coast of Twofold Bay has decreased significantly, and the original pod of orcas has never been seen since. Many believe that the killer whales of Eden have gone extinct, but their stories will live on, as a reminder of the relationship between humans and orcas. However, this is just the beginning of the story. The public perception of orcas during the early part of the 20th century was fear and terror. They were viewed as competitors by the whalers due to the fact they would sometimes attack and feed on whales that had been harpooned or being towed back to the whaling stations. This was posed as a threat to the whaling operations, and many sailors viewed them as vermin or pests. There were also occasional reports of orcas attacking small boats or posing a danger to fishermen and sailors, particularly when interactions between humans and orcas were common. The other influence in public perception was the fear of the unknown. Like many apex predators, orcas are surrounded by myths and misconceptions that fueled the fear around them. Their large size, sharp teeth, and hunting prowess contributed to a perception of orcas as formidable predators to be approached with caution. This continued until 1964, when a single event would change the entire world's view on orcas. In the water surrounding Vancouver Island, Canada, fisheries managers once viewed orcas as a vicious predator that should be called, and in fact became a sport to throw rocks at orcas while they swam by, or shoot them if they got too close to fishing nets. In 1961, the government of Canada had a machine gun installed in Seymour Narrows to call the population after many complaints came in about the population of orcas. The gun was never fired, but shows the degree to which orcas were feared in Hayden, BC. This continued until 1964, when the Vancouver Aquarium had put in a special request. The aquarium had requested an orca to be called so they could use the whale as a reference in order to build a life-sized orca statue. When the whaling team found a pod of southern resident orcas off the coast of Turner Island, they decided to target one of the orcas in the group. However, instead of killing the orca, the harpooner missed his mark and instead landed an inch shy of his target. This caused the whale to be immobilized, but still alive. The whalers then decided to bring the young whale back to the Vancouver Aquarium, where they decided to keep him alive. They named the orca Moby Doll. Moby Doll survived in captivity for 87 days, and with that, he was the first orca to survive more than 48 hours in captivity. During his stay at the aquarium, the public was able to come and visit him, and with that, a crowd of over 20,000 people showed up to see the whale in his enclosure that was built for him on the first day it opened. While he was at the aquarium, he was underfed and started to lose his weight. Soon after Moby Doll died, an industry was starting to build in the Pacific Northwest, capturing and selling orcas, and this was all in part of one man's dream. In 1965, Ted Griffin became the first person to ride a killer whale. But how did he get here? Ted Griffin had always loved animals since he was a kid, and he had pets ranging from a seagull to a lungfish. Griffin opened his own aquarium in Seattle down on the city's waterfront. He was hoping to capitalize on the upcoming World's Fair. He then became obsessed with a pipe dream of his for the ultimate attraction, a live killer whale. His first experience with an orca was with Moby Doll. In 1964, when the Vancouver Aquarium was successful in capturing and keeping a killer whale in captivity for the first time, he decided to journey from his home in Puget Sound to visit the orca in Vancouver. When he arrived at the aquarium, he noticed that Moby Doll was very noticeably thin, compared to orcas in the wild, as Moby Doll appeared to Griffin to be, quote, gaunt and lethargic, end quote. He noticed that there were several live lingcod that aquarium staff had tied to strings, which seemed to be their cautious approach to feeding the orca. He then cut one of the fish loose, grabbed it by its head, and slapped it against the water. This caught the attention of Moby Doll, and he swam over and grabbed the fish right out of his hands. This experience of Griffin feeding Moby Doll showed the possibility of his dream, and made him even more determined to acquire his own killer whale. The opportunity for him came in 1965 when an orca was caught accidentally in a fishing net. He quickly took the chance to buy the orca for $8,000 and made his way up to a small town in Namu, BC. He had Regal Marinas design a cage to tow the orca, named Namu, 450 miles in a floating pen to Seattle. Griffin arrived in Namu in Seattle and he became a big sensation, as Namu was only the third orca to be captured and the first orca to perform in swim for person for audiences. Griffin was the first person to ride on the back of an orca just a month after being in captivity. Unfortunately, Namu lasted only a year in captivity, passing away due to a massive bacterial infection by the raw sewage being dumped into the bay he was housed in. Griffin, blaming himself for Namu's death, was inconsolable, but by then he had orders for orcas from aquariums all around the world. As the world had become killer whale crazy, with Namu gone, catching whales just became business for Ted. From 1965 to 1972, Griffin's business Namu Inc. captured over 30 orcas from the waters around Seattle and Vancouver Island. Griffin captured the original Shamu in 1965 and leased and then sold her to SeaWorld San Diego. Each orca cost the aquarium $20,000 to $25,000 per captured orca. Many whales have been captured or killed, but the most famous whale hunt is the Penn Cove incident that happened in 1970. The largest orca capture took place at Penn Cove on Whidbey's Island in Washington, US. Griffin had caught what he called a superpod, as there were 90 to 100 orcas in his net. Griffin may even caught the whole southern resident orca population surging and leaping behind the nets. Griffin knew he had more whales than he could safely handle, so he let most of the orcas go. However, he's kept some 40 orcas behind the nets. With his catch still in his nets, he began the tedious work of sorting through the ones he would keep and the ones he would let go. Up until then, the orca captures were featured prominently in newspapers such as the Seattle Times. They were described as sporting events whenever Griffin's helicopter would begin his next search for an orca pod. However, this came to an end in 1970 as Griffin made his largest capture at the height of the tourist season. With onlookers present during the capture, this was the first time people were up close and personal, and it haunted them. As they heard the whales' cries due to being separated from each other, this also affected people participating in the capture as well. With no regulations on how many whales Griffin could take, he could have sold every last whale he had. But most croppers, as whale catchers called themselves, believed that if they managed the industry just like any other fishing industry, this could go on forever. However, as we know now, this is the limited and often incorrect understanding of orca biology at the time. During the night, opponents who were seeking to foil the hunt cut a hole in the net. However, this results in the death of 4 baby orcas, and Griffin's business partner Goldsberry suggested that they fill the orcas with rocks and tie an anchor to their tail to sink them to the bottom. Yet, even after 4 orcas drowned, another adult female orca would drown as well, bringing the total number of deaths to 5. Even after this whole ordeal, they did not expect that 1 orca would wash up on the beach, and 3 more were found by a fisherman. The public regard took a dark turn towards Griffin and his capture team in 1972, with regulations coming into place from the government due to the public outcry from the Penn Cove capture. Griffin sold his company to Goldsberry and left the whale catching business for good. However, this was not the last orcas being captured in the Pacific Northwest. Goldsberry sold the business to SeaWorld soon after Griffin sold it to him. However, the federal government enacted the Marine Mammal Protection Act that same year. But SeaWorld was allowed to continue its orca captures due to be given an economic hardship exemption from NOAA. But it seemed the whales are getting harder to capture as they were growing wise to the sound of Goldsberry's boat and tactics, including being chased by the helicopter. He also used firecrackers to herd the whales where he wanted to. Through the many years they were hunted, the orcas learned ways of protecting themselves. The pods learned to split up, the parents sending the young in another direction and deploying themselves as decoys. Some of the orcas, who had been caught many times, learned to roll their bodies and lay their dorsal fins on the water, making them harder to spot. After years of getting skunked by the whales, the hunt that happened in 1976 in Budd Inlet near the capital would prove prove historic. Ralph Munro, a former staff aide to Governor Dan Evans, was sailing when he encountered whales fleeing across the water. Munro realized that they were being chased. He saw Goldsberry lighting seal bombs and throwing them at the whales, and pursuing the terrified orcas in speedboats. Munro reached out to the press, and the hunt was on the front page news around the region. Munro then got the help of State Attorney General Slade Gordon, who organized legal attack on SeaWorld. Governor Evans announced his opposition to the whale hunt, and within hours, the state was able to get a federal restraining order, which prohibited SeaWorld from moving the whales. More than 100 opponents circled the nets in kayaks, canoes, and on the beach. Munro personally delivered the restraining order to Goldsberry, and SeaWorld went to work on squashing the injunction the following morning. The legal battle ended up going to the Supreme Court in Seattle. Eventually, 3 of the 6 captured whales escaped, a 4th whale was too large for captivity and was released, and the 2 more were ultimately ordered to be released back to the wild. SeaWorld in the settlement agreement vowed to never hunt killer whales in Washington waters. The orca hunt in Bud Inlet was the last orca hunt in America. However, SeaWorld set its sights on another ocean, and with that choice found a whale that changed the world forever. Since 1965, SeaWorld has had orcas in captivity, beginning with Shamu in 1965. However, the most famous orca would not be captured until the 1980s. In the waters that surround Iceland, 3 orcas were captured in November of 1983. One of those orcas was later known as Tilikum. Tilikum was the largest orca in captivity and became known as the most dangerous orca. Tilikum started his performing career at Sealand of Pacific, which was located in Oak Bay, Canada. During his stay at Sealand, Tilikum was put with 2 other orcas named Haida 2 and Nuka 4. As a result of the matriarchal structure that orcas live in, Tilikum was abused by the orcas who behaved aggressively towards him and raked him with their teeth. In 1991, a tragedy struck with Kelty Lee Byrne. Kelty was a 20-year-old Canadian student, animal trainer, and competitive swimmer. On February 20th, 1991, Byrne was working a shift when she slipped and fell into the whale pool. Witnesses recalled that Byrne screamed and panicked after realizing that one of the whales was holding her foot and dragging her underwater. Rescue attempts were forwarded by the whales, who refused to let Byrne go. She was later retrieved with a large net, after which she was determined to be deceased. Her death was ruled an accident. Tilikum was then sold to SeaWorld, where he performed in shows and was used for breeding. Unfortunately, we did not learn from our first mistake for Tilikum. Daniel P. Dukes was a 27-year-old man from South Carolina and the second death of Tilikum. Sometime on July 6, 1999, Daniel had hidden himself somewhere in SeaWorld, emerged and proceeded to the whale pool where Tilikum resided. The following morning, his body was discovered in the water by the staff. As SeaWorld claims to have no footage of the pool that night, it is unclear exactly what transpired. The third death that changed the way people think about orcas in captivity was Dawn Brancho. On February 24, 2010, Dawn Brancho was finishing up a show at Tilikum. She then called him to a smaller pool where she was lying down on her stomach. Right before she was pulled into the water, another trainer, Jan Topoleski, noticed that Brancho was struggling to get her ponytail free from Tilikum's mouth and pressed the alarm button. A moment later, she had been pulled under. Tilikum then began dragging her around and acting agitated. He briefly let her go at one point but grabbed her again. Tilikum had Brancho for 40 minutes before she was retrieved after Tilikum was beached after being raised out of the water. Emergency services were called and Brancho was pronounced dead at the scene. Tilikum lived out the rest of his life until March 2016, when it was reported that he was battling an infection. On January 6, 2017, SeaWorld announced that Tilikum had died early in the morning. Many people still wonder why Tilikum was so aggressive and why he killed people. There are ideas why Tilikum was aggressive. It is suggested that the years of abuse and cruelty towards Tilikum, including the act of allowing the other whales to rake Tilikum's skin with their teeth until he bled, had made him an aggressive whale. This also brought into question the harms of having orcas in captivity to the public spotlight. The effects of having orcas in captivity are devastating, as they were never meant to be held in tanks. In the wild, there have been virtually no documented attacks on humans by orcas. However, in captivity, there have been 4 deaths and many other incidents. It is unclear why these acts take place, but it is thought that the stress of captivity is thought to play a significant role. Captive orcas also display aggression towards each other, as well as self-destructive behaviors such as rake marks and injuries that are often observed on captive orcas. They also engage in harmful stereotypic behaviors such as gnawing on tank walls or gates and pacing back and forth in the tank. At least 160 orcas have died in captivity, and even more if stillbirths are counted. Throughout the orcas in captivity, health issues are abundant. Most notable issue is the dorsal fin collapse in male orcas, as well as tooth damage. It is thought that male dorsal fin collapse is a result of the orca's inability to swim straight lines and develop musculature that would be common when swimming in the open ocean. Severe dental issues present themselves in almost all captive orcas, who often chew on bars or walls out of frustration. To prevent infection, their teeth are drilled and left unfilled, requiring daily flushing and sometimes antibiotic treatment. Resistant strains of pneumonia and other infections have been the cause of deaths for numerous captive orcas. Orcas do not thrive in captive conditions, yet numerous orcas are found in aquariums around the world. Marine parks actively pursue captive breeding in order to increase their supply of entertainers. Female orcas are impregnated around the age of 8, while in the wild, the average age of reproduction is 15. Females are also impregnated repeatedly, not allowing for a normal period after giving birth to raise their calf. They are also separated from the mothers and calves, even though they would have remained together for life. Inbreeding is common among captive orcas, and orcas suffer from stillbirths or miscarriages. Captive mothers have also been documented rejecting or even attacking their own calf. Here are a few notable orcas in captivity. Lolita was a captive southern resident killer whale where she was held at the Miami Sea Aquarium in the US since 1970. She was captured during the Penn Cove capture. She was also the second oldest killer whale in captivity. In 2023, there was a plan to return Lolita to the Pacific Northwest to let her live out the rest of her life back home. Unfortunately, she passed away on August 18, 2023 due to renal failure. Kiko was a male orca captured near Iceland in 1979. He portrayed Willie in the 1993 film Three Willie. In 1996, Warner Bros. And International Marine Mammal Project collaborated to return Kiko to the wild. After years of preparation to reintegrate Kiko back into the wild, Kiko was flown to Iceland in 1998 and in 2002 became the first captive orca to be fully released back into the wild. Unfortunately, he seeked contact with humans in Norway, where it was reported he was letting children ride his back. He would remain in Norway until his death on December 12, 2003 due to pneumonia. Hugo was a killer whale who was captured in 1968 and he was named after Hugo Vinland, a pilot who sailed the Atlantic alone in a sailboat. He was the only whale to ever be with Lolita. Hugo has a history of aggression, as in 1970 a trainer stuck his head into Hugo's mouth and Hugo bit down on him. Multiple other trainers say that Hugo attacked and acted aggressively towards people. In January of 1980, Hugo had started to act sluggish. He then died on March 4th, 1980 as the cause of his death was a brain aneurysm. Before his death, Hugo had been thrashing and ramming his head into the wall of his tank, which some believed contributed to his death. Luna was a killer whale born in Puget Sound in 1999. His name Luna is Latin for moon. After being separated from his mother while still young, Luna spent 5 years in Nootka Sound, an inlet located on Vancouver Island. He became very close to people and became recognized internationally. Remaining alone in Nootka Sound, Luna was accidentally killed by a tugboat propeller in March 2006. In the 23rd century, orcas still face many challenges. The southern resident killer whales, which population is struggling at only 74 whales. This is due to contaminants in the water, a decline in availability of Chinook salmon, and physical and acoustic disturbances from marine traffic and sonar. While the northern resident killer whales, which their population is over 300 orcas, this brings up a question. Why are these different populations at different levels? While the southern resident orcas population has fallen, over the same period, the northern resident orcas population has grown steadily, even though they have a similar diet and overlapping territory with the southern residents. Scientists believe that is how to do with how the northern resident orcas hunt salmon, as the northern resident females were capturing more salmon than the males, while in the southern residents, the males are capturing more salmon than the females. Other issues that affect orcas are climate change, whaling, boat strikes, and exhaust emissions. Navy training can also affect orcas from the sonar in the ships, as was shown in a video from 2005. As the ocean temperature continues to rise, this can cause orcas to move to colder waters. Further northward, food sources are more abundant. However, the most important thing I think we should remember is the following. We are a part of nature, not apart from nature, meaning we're fundamentally connected to nature. Rather than seeing ourselves as separate, we should rather see ourselves as another species in a larger ecosystem of the natural world. However, one more question arises. Are orcas sentient? Humanity believes that we are the only sentient life form on planet Earth. What if I tell you that is wrong? In a review of the cognitive abilities of whales and orcas, a paper from Applied Animal Behavior wrote that they, quote, should be recognized as unique individuals, communities, societies, and cultures and validated as such, end quote. An orca's brain is very similar to a human brain, as they have complex wrinkly folds similar to humans. These folds allow orcas to fit more processing power into a concentrated space, giving rise to all sorts of skills and abilities. Whales, including orcas, are able to use advanced forms of echolocation to navigate the ocean. By clicking, they can interpret the echo to create a mental image of the world around them. This form of navigation requires large processing power and is theorized to have necessitated larger brains throughout evolution. In addition to clicks, orcas also whistle. Not only is their whistling language complex, but it also has its own regional dialects. One researcher stated that it may be as distinct as English or Japanese. Most mammal sounds are driven by biology or instinct. Orcas, with their ability to learn whistles that resemble words, molded by whomever taught the sounds to them, are linguistically quite advanced in the animal kingdom. Orcas live in a group called pods to hunt. These pods are remarkably intelligent, nabbing their prey, so much so that human computer scientists have modeled orca hunting behavior to create algorithms. However, pods are complex social networks that provide emotional and physical support for orcas throughout their lifetimes. Within these pods, orcas are capable of creating a unique culture specific to their pod alone. Each pod has their own method of communication and traditions. It also appears that each orca has different levels of friendships between the other orcas in their pods. In addition to their intelligence, it seems that orcas have complex emotions like humans. For example, a story that gripped the world was when a female orca whose calf died shortly after birth refused to part from the dead body, attempting to revive him for 17 days. The theory of mind is a psychological term that describes the ability to understand that other beings contain thoughts, goals, and feelings that are different from our own. There is evidence to suggest that orcas possess the theory of mind, as seen in Captain Orcas. For example, in SeaWorld in 1979, one animal trainer injured his ribs in the waters of Orcas. The orcas used echolocation to understand his injuries and then gently pushed him towards the edge of the tank so he could crawl to safety. Orcas are also known to play pranks and jokes on other orcas and humans, which indicates the theory of mind. Orcas have been known to save humans in the wild and protect them from sharks. This shows a level of intelligence only known in a few other animals. Orcas, also known as killer whales, have had many interactions with humans throughout history, from the native tribes all around the world to the first scientifically documented sighting in 1530. Orcas have gone from a monster of the deep to a gentle and curious animal that needs to be protected. While the future of the southern resident orcas is uncertain, I believe that we can help prevent their population from getting worse. I also believe that orcas are indeed sentient and aware of their surroundings, as they are one of the few animals that have passed the mirror test. If you can take one thing away from this video, I hope it is this: we are not apart from nature, we are a part of nature. And as always, stay open and stay curious. And if this video intrigues you, please check out the other video on the screen now. Thanks for watching.